Hello, political science students. This is Mr. Stark. Um, I miss all of you. It really breaks my heart that I can't be there in person to teach you guys the rest of your time as seniors. I miss our conversations. I miss our laughs. I miss the really profound points and ideas that you guys share. So I just want to make it clear that you are definitely missed, and yeah, I don't know what to say from there, but I hope to be able to see you all at some point before we all go our separate ways. Uh, but we have one more chapter to do, and that is chapter 12 on political violence. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, when political violence comes to mind, uh, different people have different ideas that come into their head. Some people think of 9/11, which is a good example of political violence. Some people think of, people fighting over politics, sometimes physically, such as this famous instance among two members in Congress literally fighting over slavery. One was almost killed, beaten to death about it. Others might be political riots. I believe this one was taken as a part of the Egyptian revolution that we saw from the documentary The Square. The actual definition of political violence is simply the use of physical violence or the threat of physical violence to achieve political goals. So it doesn't necessarily have to be actual physical violence, it can be the threat of physical violence as well. Examples, terrorism, prime example, political revolutions, rioting, ethnic cleansing and genocide. We just got done talking a little bit about Rwanda. So the first type we're going to look at is what's known as state violence against individuals or groups. So this is basically the government, the official federal government or another level of government committing violence against individuals or groups. And there's many reasons why this might occur. Some can be legitimized by law, some under no circumstances can be legitimized. Most state violence at least comes under the veneer or auspice of order maintenance. So they're trying to maintain order. Remember that first goal of every state is security. And if you can't keep internal security or order in your country, you really don't have a country. So states are willing to use violence to maintain that first goal. Usually, citizens support order maintenance, a certain level of violence to maintain order. Now, I think most citizens would say it shouldn't be the first step that's taken to maintain order. There's obviously, well, when I was a policeman, we had what's called a force pyramid or a force triangle, where you start at the lowest level of force, such as simply officer presence, which was a majority of the circumstances, the bottom level of the triangle. Then you had verbal commands. Then you had soft tissue contact, which is like putting your hands on someone, guiding them, or even putting handcuffs on them or putting them into certain control holds. Then you had hard tissue contact, which would be things like using your baton, and then you had non-lethal force, which would be things like your taser or pepper spray. And then you had lethal force, which forms the very tip of the pyramid, which is only used in the most extreme circumstances. Same thing with countries, hopefully. Now, with that being said, order maintenance can also be an excuse to resort to violence for very minor infractions. So we all know examples of countries where violence is used by the police, the military, for simply gathering in a park because they see it as a threat to their regime. That obviously is not really legitimate, but they're using the order maintenance rationale to do that. When left unchecked, states' legitimate use of violence can be turned against political opponents. We see that in Russia, where, as I told you before, Putin doesn't have to cheat, but he does. He has his police, his intelligence officials go after political opponents, physically assault them. They uses intimidation tactics, uses frivolous charges against them. That is what unchecked use of force can lead to. This is Hosni Mubarak, the former dictator of Egypt, who you just learned about when we watched The Square. We all know about Fidel Castro, who came in under the promise of social equality, but then became as bad a tyrant as Batista, the Western-backed dictator who he supplanted. And of course, there's Putin, as I just talked about. No need to explain that. This is a map that shows you between the years of 2010 and 2014 the areas of the country that saw the most internal political violence, so the government using violence against their own people. Interestingly enough, you see Russia as having the highest, or one of the highest. And then you have Iran, obviously, as one as well. This little teardrop by India is Sri Lanka, another very volatile country. So yeah, Turkey being one as well. China, no surprises there. Mexico having a reasonable level, and some other South American countries as well. This is called the terrorism and political violence map. We'll get to terrorism probably in a future lecture, but this shows you some areas of the world that are political violence hotspots. Of course, continent of Africa is on fire, as you can see there. We talked about the legacy of colonialism and what that's done to the people, to the governments, to so many things there. So what does the state or the countries use for order maintenance? Security forces. This can be anything from police to military. It can be paramilitary, which are like unofficial groups in areas in Central America where street gangs like MS-13 and others, MS-18 and other street gangs basically have almost unchecked power. They control entire sections of cities. They control prisons. They basically have, the black market is out in the open. The government does not have the money, the resources, or the courage to stand up to them. You have a lot of paramilitary groups of, better word for it would be vigilantes or militias that go around hunting down MS-13 members and shooting them on the spot if they identify them through, word of mouth or gang tattoos or whatever. Those would be unofficial security forces. The penal system is another way in which they use violence, such as judges or magistrates, which is in some countries they have judges versus magistrates. Judges would have a little more power at the federal level than magistrates at the state or local level, but in the hands or in the pocket of the president or the dictator can also exercise political violence, such as prisons, jails, prison camps. Those are all tools as well. And the cost of state-sanctioned violence, enormous. In the 20th century, 300 million people were killed by government violence and war. Tragedy. Terrible. 86% of that, excess of 250 million of those people, was the government killing its own citizens. Now, if you click on this hyperlink, you'll go to a video talking about some of the worst offenders. I think the 10 worst offenders of the dictators who killed their own people. You'll see a lot of well-known people: Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, lots of others as well. Here's some of the right there. Mao Zedong, through famine, through his political forces, through numerous hands that he, numerous tools that he had his hands on. Over 76 million of his own people were killed. Stalin was 42.6, Hitler 20.9. King Leopold of Belgium colonized the Congo, excess of 10 million people. It was the Belgian colonists that started the practice of punishing slaves or punishing the indigenous population by severing arms or legs to either prevent them from escaping, prevent them from fighting, or just basically warn everyone else this is what happens when you try to go against us. That practice is still in effect today. The next type of political violence we have is individual versus individual, so one-on-one. Most individual violence is not politically motivated. So it's a well-known axiom in police forces that murder, the unlawful homicide, it's not a complex thing. I mean, people love watching detective shows, Criminal Minds, all these others where murder is this twisted plot. It just takes an hour to explain. Most murder is fairly easy to solve. It's people who the victim knew. They leave easy signs. Even people who try to get away with it, it's very hard. So most individual versus individual violence or killing is, in the criminal system, it's not political. But some examples of individual political violence could be a political assassination. I'm sure you're probably thinking of JFK, President Lincoln, McKinley, U.S. presidents, and foreign leaders abroad face this risk. Political enmity. So when political rivals becomes deadly, such as the Aaron Burr versus Alexander Hamilton, the duel, which ended with the death of Alexander Hamilton. Violence against someone for their political affiliation or voting record. It is an unfortunate effect of our polarized political culture that no longer are people just exchanging words with people they disagree with. It's becoming more and more violent. We would talk more about the role of identity politics in that, but unfortunately, we can't get into that over lecture on the computer. This is the famous painting of Aaron Burr shooting Alexander Hamilton. Just really quick, the very actual duels where one person was killed, they both were trying to kill each other, was actually pretty rare. Most duels with pistols ended with they went back to back, marched 20, 15, or 20 paces away. Anything more than that, and the guns were grossly inaccurate, which they still were. They'd point their pistols up in the air and they'd fire them. That was the duel. Their animosity was done. Legend has it, Hamilton followed that suit. He turned around, fired his pistol in the air. Aaron Burr waited for him to do that, leveled his pistol nice and coolly at Alexander Hamilton, and shot and killed him. And that ends this first lecture for Chapter 12. So go ahead and answer the challenge questions 1 and 2 on the Google form and submit them. Again, I miss you all. I thoroughly enjoyed having you seniors. Honestly, it was one of the bright parts of my semester, was being able to start off my B days with seniors that I already knew, that I already had a relationship with, and that I knew would make teaching enjoyable, which you all did. So I miss you, and I look forward to again seeing and talking with you all again. So until then, Mr. Stark out.